This may be the most significant day in Middle Eastern geopolitics since the American invasion of Iraq, and the world is watching in horror as two of the most powerful military forces on earth unleash coordinated devastation against a nation of 85 million people. Israel and the United States have launched massive military strikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran, targeting the capital Tehran and cities across the country in what can only be described as an act of unprovoked aggression against a sovereign nation that posed no imminent threat to either attacker. While Western media celebrates what they frame as decisive action against a rogue regime, the reality unfolding on the ground tells a far darker story. Iranian civilians are experiencing the terror of bombardment without warning, without adequate shelter, without the defensive systems that protect Israeli citizens from the consequences of their government's aggression. Donald Trump has taken to his social media platform to declare that he will annihilate Iran's ballistic and nuclear capabilities, using the language of destruction and domination that reveals the true nature of American foreign policy, stripped of its humanitarian pretenses. Hey everyone, I'm Michael Harris, geopolitical and military analyst, and you're watching my channel. Before we break down exactly what is happening and what it means for Iran, for the region, and for the entire world order, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What I'm about to share with you is the truth about this attack that mainstream media is deliberately obscuring in their rush to celebrate American and Israeli military power. Drop a comment with your thoughts as we go through this together. And share this video with everyone who needs to understand what is really happening to the Iranian people at this very moment. Now let's examine the full scope of this aggression and Iran's courageous response. The attack began in the early morning hours when Israeli aircraft launched what they called preventive strikes against Tehran. Within hours, it became clear that this was not a limited Israeli operation, but a coordinated assault involving the full might of American military power positioned over weeks throughout the region. The Pentagon has officially named its operation Epic Fury, while Israel calls theirs Roaring Lion. These theatrical names reveal the mindset of the attackers, the predatory psychology that views the destruction of another nation as something to be celebrated with dramatic branding. They see themselves as forces of righteous fury, unleashed upon enemies who deserve destruction. But Iran is not prey to be hunted. Iran is a civilization that has endured for thousands of years, that has survived invasions from Alexander to the Mongols to Saddam Hussein, backed by these same Western powers that now bomb its cities. Iran will survive this aggression as well, though the cost in human suffering will be measured in ways that Western audiences will never be forced to confront. The scale of the attack is staggering in its scope and brutality. Dozens of targets across Iran have been struck, not merely military installations, but what the attackers describe as regime targets. This language is deliberately revealing of their true intentions. When Americans and Israelis speak of striking regime targets, they mean killing Iranian leaders, destroying the institutions of Iranian government, assassinating commanders and officials in their homes and offices. This is not warfare against military capability as international law might permit in self-defense. This is attempted decapitation of an entire nation's leadership, the kind of operation that international law explicitly prohibits, but that American power exempts itself from any legal constraint. Tehran, a city of more than 9 million people, has been struck repeatedly throughout the morning hours. The residence of the supreme leader has reportedly been targeted by precision munitions designed to kill the highest leadership of the Islamic Republic. The presidency has been targeted. Iranian state television has shown images of craters in central Tehran where missiles have impacted, destroying buildings and endangering countless civilian lives. The explosions have continued for hours across the eastern and western districts of the capital, with residents reporting continuous detonations that allow no respite, no moment of safety, no certainty that the next explosion will not destroy their building or their family. The city of Isfahan has been attacked, one of the world's great historic cities with architectural treasures dating back centuries that represent the heritage of all humanity, not merely Iran. Karaj has been struck based on eyewitness testimony reaching international media. Qom, a holy city of immense religious significance to Shia Muslims worldwide, has been targeted in what can only be understood as deliberate provocation against the religious identity of the Islamic Republic. Across the country, Iranian civilians are experiencing what the people of Iraq experienced in 2003, what the people of Libya experienced in 2011, what the people of Syria have experienced for over a decade of conflict. American and Israeli bombs falling on their homes, their cities, their lives, while the world watches and Western commentators celebrate. Here is what Western media will not tell you about the reality on the ground in Iran tonight: the fundamental asymmetry in civilian protection that reveals whose lives the international community considers worthy of protection. Unlike Israel, where every apartment building has reinforced shelters built to withstand missile attack, where the population has been preparing for weeks with government guidance and military protection, where sophisticated missile defense systems, including Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow batteries, provide multiple layers of interception, Iran has no such infrastructure for civilian protection. The mayor of Tehran suggested that residents could shelter in metro stations or underground parking garages. That is the reality facing Iranian civilians as American and Israeli weapons fall on their capital. They have no purpose-built shelters. They have no Iron Dome or David's Sling or Arrow systems to intercept incoming missiles. They have only their courage and their faith in the walls of their homes as foreign missiles strike their neighborhoods. The Iranian people received no warning before the attacks began. No sirens alerted them to seek shelter. The government had no time to issue directives before the first explosions shook the capital. The population simply woke to the sound of detonations as foreign missiles struck their city without any prior indication that this morning would be different from any other. Compare this to Israel, where the entire country has been on alert for weeks, where schools have been closed since yesterday, where reservists are being called up by the thousands and tens of thousands, where every citizen knows exactly where their nearest shelter is located and has had time to prepare supplies for extended periods underground. The asymmetry in civilian protection reveals the asymmetry in who the international community considers worthy of protection. Israeli lives are treated as precious, requiring elaborate defensive systems funded by billions of American taxpayer dollars annually. Iranian lives are treated as expendable collateral in the pursuit of American and Israeli strategic objectives. According to reports from correspondents in the region, telephone lines in Iran have been cut, preventing families from communicating, preventing coordination of emergency response, preventing the Iranian people from even knowing the full scope of what is happening to their country. This deliberate targeting of communications infrastructure is designed to maximize confusion and fear among the civilian population while limiting their ability to organize any response to the crisis engulfing them. Donald Trump's statement during the ongoing operation reveals the true objectives with chilling clarity that should alarm anyone who believes in international law or the sovereignty of nations. He declared that Iran's military capabilities would be completely annihilated, using language of total destruction rather than limited military objectives. He threatened Iranian soldiers and police with death if they do not surrender immediately, essentially demanding that the entire security apparatus of a sovereign nation abandon their posts while foreign bombs fall on their capital. He offered immunity to those who defect, calling for the collapse of the Iranian state and the abandonment of national defense in terms that would constitute treason if any American official advocated similar behavior during an attack on the United States. Trump called on the Iranian people to rise up against their government while American bombs are falling on their cities, revealing the fundamental delusion underlying American strategic thinking. He believes that bombing a nation into submission will somehow inspire gratitude and cooperation from those being bombed. He imagines that Iranians watching their capital burn will blame their own government rather than the foreign powers attacking them. This is the same delusional thinking that predicted Iraqis would welcome American troops with flowers, that Libyans would build stable democracy after NATO destroyed their state, that Afghans would embrace American values after 20 years of occupation. The pattern of failure is clear to everyone except those who continue to repeat it. Vice President J.D. Vance stated days ago that this would be a limited operation in time, that there was no question of getting bogged down, but that it would be an operation to make the Iranian regime understand that it must negotiate and essentially capitulate. This language of forced capitulation reveals that the goal is not security but submission, not defense but domination. The United States demands that Iran surrender its sovereign right to develop defensive capabilities while American forces actively bomb Iranian territory. The hypocrisy is breathtaking in its scope. The Israeli response to Iran's inevitable retaliation demonstrates that this conflict will not remain one-sided, regardless of the disparity in defensive capabilities. Within hours of the attack beginning, Iran launched retaliatory strikes against Israel, Approximately 75 ballistic missiles were fired toward Israeli territory, according to Iranian state media. Sirens have sounded across Israel, from Tel Aviv to the northern regions to the Golan Heights and areas near the Jordanian border. The entire Israeli population has been forced into shelters, experiencing exactly the kind of disruption and terror that they hope to inflict on Iran without consequence. This Iranian response proves what serious analysts have always understood. Iran possesses the capability to impose severe costs on its attackers regardless of their conventional military superiority. The correspondent reporting from Tel Aviv described rushing to shelter as sirens wailed, experiencing exactly the fear that Israeli planners assumed would remain confined to their victims. Israeli media reports confirm multiple waves of missile attacks, with alerts sounding repeatedly across the country, forcing millions into shelters for extended periods. The Israeli population, which according to polls cited by Israeli media enthusiastically supported this attack, is now experiencing the consequences of aggression firsthand. For weeks, Israeli commentators have spoken of their desire to strike Iran, of their hope that American support would enable decisive action against what they call an existential threat. Now they sit in shelters as Iranian missiles approach, discovering that war is not a spectator sport where only the enemy suffers. What makes this attack particularly outrageous is the fundamental asymmetry in military capability combined with the framing of who constitutes a threat to whom. Iran has not attacked the United States. Iran has not invaded its neighbors in modern history. Iran has not launched wars of aggression that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, as America did in Iraq. Iran's military doctrine is explicitly defensive, designed to deter attack by raising the costs of aggression rather than to enable conquest of territory. The missiles that American planners want to destroy exist precisely because Iran has watched what happens to countries that cannot defend themselves against American power. The Gulf states find themselves in an impossible position created entirely by American belligerents despite their explicit requests for restraint. Qatar hosts Al Udeid Air Base, the headquarters of Central Command, where 10,000 American troops are normally stationed. The base has been largely evacuated of non-essential personnel, with all Western civilians instructed to remain near shelters in anticipation of Iranian retaliation. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates host additional American installations that are similarly vulnerable. These countries explicitly requested for weeks that the United States not attack Iran precisely because they understand the consequences. They are within easy range of Iranian missiles, far closer than Israel. Their petroleum infrastructure, their cities, their populations are all vulnerable to retaliation that American forces cannot prevent. Yet their concerns were dismissed because American strategic objectives take precedence over the security of nominal allies who will bear the costs of decisions made in Washington. An Iranian official has declared that all American and Israeli assets in the Middle East are now legitimate targets under the laws of armed conflict. This includes not only military bases, but potentially the aircraft carriers steaming in the Persian Gulf, the support vessels that sustain American operations, the logistics chains that enable power projection far from American shores. The USS Abraham Lincoln sits approximately 700 kilometers from Iranian territory, launching aircraft that are striking Iranian cities. Under any reasonable interpretation of international law governing armed conflict, that vessel and its escorts are legitimate military targets for a nation defending itself against ongoing attack. The human dimension of what is happening deserves attention that Western media will not provide, because it contradicts the celebration of military power that dominates their coverage. In Tehran, families are huddled in basements and parking garages without proper shelter, listening to explosions shake their city, not knowing if the next missile will strike their building. They have received no government directive on where to shelter because there was no warning before the attack began. They cannot call their relatives to confirm their safety because telephone lines have been disrupted. They can only wait and pray as a coalition of the world's most powerful military forces attacks their nation. The international community has failed utterly in its responsibility to prevent this war of aggression. Russia and China warned at the United Nations Security Council that military action against Iran would violate international law and risk catastrophic escalation that could draw in multiple powers. Their warnings were ignored because American power recognizes no constraint except its own interests. The Gulf states pleaded with Washington not to attack, understanding that they would bear severe consequences from conflict on their doorstep. Their pleas were dismissed as irrelevant to American decision-making. European allies expressed concern about escalation without taking any concrete action to prevent it. The institutions designed to preserve international peace have proven completely ineffective against American determination to use military force regardless of legal or moral constraints. The appearance of Reza Pahlavi, son of the former Shah, on social media calling this attack humanitarian assistance reveals the cynical manipulation underlying American regime change operations. This figure, who has lived in comfortable Western exile for decades while his countrymen suffered under sanctions designed to strangle the Iranian economy, now positions himself to return on the heels of American bombers, just as Ahmed Chalabi positioned himself to benefit from the destruction of Iraq. The Iranian people remember what happened after such liberation in Iraq. They have no desire to experience the chaos, civil war, sectarian violence, and foreign occupation that followed American regime change there. The very fact that exiled figures with no domestic constituency celebrate the bombing of Iranian cities demonstrates how disconnected they are from the population they claim to represent. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has stated that Israel will create the conditions for the Iranian people to take their destiny in their own hands, language that explicitly acknowledges the goal of regime change rather than limited military objectives. The Israeli intelligence service Mossad posted messages in Persian claiming solidarity with Iranian citizens and promising to restore their days of glory. This psychological warfare targeting the Iranian population reveals that the military operation is accompanied by efforts to destabilize Iranian society from within. The attackers hope that bombing will somehow inspire Iranians to overthrow their government, ignoring all historical evidence that foreign attack produces national unity rather than internal division. Here is the strategic reality that American and Israeli planners seem unwilling to accept despite all evidence from previous conflicts. Even if every stated military objective of this operation is achieved, even if every ballistic missile site is destroyed, every nuclear facility is damaged, every Revolutionary Guard commander is killed, Iran will not surrender. The Islamic Republic has survived 47 years of American hostility, beginning from the moment Iranians reclaimed their sovereignty from American puppet dictatorship. It survived 8 years of devastating war with Iraq when Saddam Hussein was armed and supported by these same Western powers now claiming to liberate the Iranian people. It survived decades of comprehensive sanctions designed to collapse its economy and starve its population into submission. It survived assassinations of its scientists, sabotage of its facilities, cyber attacks on its infrastructure, and constant threats of military attack. The Iranian nation has demonstrated a capacity for resilience that American strategists consistently underestimate because they cannot comprehend devotion to principles beyond material calculation. The attacks are reportedly planned to continue for multiple days. Israeli officials cited by media suggest 3 to 4 days of sustained operations targeting Iranian military infrastructure. American officials speak of comprehensive degradation of Iranian capabilities across the spectrum of ballistic missiles, nuclear facilities, naval assets, and regime leadership. But each day of bombing strengthens Iranian resolve rather than weakening it. Each civilian killed becomes a martyr whose memory demands continued resistance. Each building destroyed becomes evidence of American brutality that justifies Iranian defiance for generations to come. The mathematics of counterinsurgency that American military theorists understand when applied to other contexts somehow escape them when applied to Iran. You cannot bomb a nation into loving its attackers. You can only deepen the determination to resist that makes any occupation unsustainable. The economic consequences of this attack will reverberate globally in ways that American planners either ignored or considered acceptable costs for populations they do not represent. 20% of global oil exports transit the Strait of Hormuz within easy reach of Iranian military capabilities that cannot all be destroyed regardless of how many bombs fall on Iranian territory. Oil prices will spike dramatically as markets react to uncertainty about future supply, potentially exceeding $200 per barrel if significant disruption occurs. Inflation that is already straining American households and undermining Trump's domestic political standing will intensify dramatically. Supply chains that serve global commerce will be disrupted for months or years depending on the scope and duration of conflict. The regional escalation potential is equally alarming for anyone who understands the network of alliances and interests that connect conflicts throughout the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon possesses an arsenal of over 150,000 rockets and missiles capable of overwhelming Israeli defenses through saturation tactics demonstrated during the June 2025 conflict. If this conflict expands as Iranian officials have warned, Israeli cities will face bombardment far exceeding anything they have experienced in their history. The Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated remarkable capability to strike Saudi oil facilities and disrupt Red Sea shipping, despite years of Saudi bombardment intended to destroy them. Iraqi militias could target American forces throughout that country within hours of receiving orders from Tehran. The network of alliances that Iran has built over decades exists precisely for moments like this, when the Islamic Republic faces existential threat from foreign powers determined to destroy it. The scenes broadcast from Israeli cities, where sirens wail repeatedly and populations rush to shelters, represent exactly the situation that Israeli planners hope to avoid through their technological superiority and American support. They wanted a war where only the enemy suffered, where Israeli society could continue normally while Iranian cities burned, where the costs of aggression would be borne entirely by those they attacked. Instead, they have a war where their own population experiences the terror of bombardment, where their own economic activity halts completely, where their own sense of security is shattered by missiles that their defensive systems cannot entirely stop. The correspondent in Tel Aviv described other residents in her building shelter expressing hope that this will be the last war, that the suffering will end quickly, that somehow bombing Iran will produce peace. This touching naivety reveals how thoroughly Israeli media has conditioned its population to believe that violence against others produces security rather than generating the very threats it claims to address. The Iranian missiles now falling on Israel exist because Israel has spent decades threatening, attacking, and assassinating Iranians. The cycle of violence that Israeli civilians now experience is the direct consequence of policies their government has pursued with their electoral support. What the Western celebration of this attack ignores is the fundamental question of what comes next, assuming the stated military objectives are achieved. Does the United States plan to occupy Iran, a nation of 85 million people with mountainous terrain ideally suited for guerrilla resistance that would make Afghanistan look simple by comparison? Does it intend to install a puppet government led by exiled figures with no domestic legitimacy that will collapse the moment American forces withdraw? Does it expect the Iranian people to simply accept foreign dictation of their government after experiencing bombardment of their cities and assassination of their leaders? None of these scenarios produce outcomes favorable to American interests. Yet the attack proceeds anyway because military action has become an end in itself, rather than a means to achievable political objectives. The courage of the Iranian people in facing this assault deserves recognition that Western media will never provide because it contradicts their narrative of liberation. Families are sheltering in metro stations and parking garages without purpose-built protection, hoping that chance spares them from the next explosion. Medical personnel are preparing to treat the wounded without knowing how many casualties this day will produce or whether their hospitals might themselves become targets. Government officials are coordinating national response while they themselves are targets of assassination attempts by precision munitions. Ordinary citizens are demonstrating the steadfastness that has characterized Iranian civilization for millennia, the refusal to surrender dignity and independence regardless of the force arrayed against them. Iran's retaliatory strikes against Israel demonstrate that this will not be the one-sided slaughter that American and Israeli planners apparently expected when they launched their operations. The missiles crossing hundreds of kilometers to strike Israeli territory prove that Iranian capabilities remain intact despite the ongoing bombardment. Each successful impact on Israeli soil, each siren forcing Israeli citizens into shelters, each disruption to Israeli normalcy sends a message that cannot be ignored by those who initiated this conflict. The cost of attacking Iran will be paid not only by Iran, but by those who chose aggression over diplomacy. This is not defiance for its own sake. It is the fundamental logic of deterrence that Iran has developed over decades precisely for moments like this. The next hours and days will determine whether this conflict remains at current intensity or expands into the regional conflagration that serious analysts have long feared, and that American planners seem to have dismissed as acceptable risk. Much depends on decisions made in Tehran, in Washington, in Tel Aviv, and in capitals throughout the region where American bases and interests are now declared legitimate targets by Iranian officials. But whatever happens next, what has already occurred today represents a fundamental transformation of international relations and the exposure of international law as meaningless when the most powerful nations choose to ignore it. The United States and Israel have demonstrated their willingness to launch massive military operations against a nation that did not attack them, that posed no imminent threat requiring preemptive action, that was engaged in diplomatic negotiations until the moment bombs began falling. They have shown that international law provides no protection against American power when American leaders decide that force serves their interests. They have proven that diplomatic negotiations can be a deceptive prelude to military assault, making future negotiations with any American administration an exercise in dangerous naivety. These lessons will be learned not only in Tehran, but in every capital that might someday find itself in American crosshairs for refusing to submit to American demands. I want to hear your thoughts on what is happening today. Do you believe this attack will achieve its objectives or create consequences American planners have not anticipated? Do you think the Iranian response will deter further aggression or invite escalation? Drop your comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand that what is being celebrated as decisive action is actually unprovoked aggression against 85 million people. I'm Michael Harris. Today, Iran faces combined American and Israeli military power in an assault violating every principle of international law. But Iran has faced such threats before and survived. The question is what kind of world we will live in when nations can be bombed at will by those with superior firepower. Stay informed, stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next video.